generalized piece is we're going to create the 2D geometry for our intersection. From that, once we have that established, we're going to modify the roadway corridor. We'll remove the end conditions in the area of the intersection, along with modifying how the intersection or how the corridor is going to interact with the intersection at the radiuses. And then from after the 2D is created, we're going to assign vertical definition to that 2D geometry. And I'll explain more what I mean when I say assign vertical definition to the 2D geometry. One thing in Open Roads Designer that's important to begin to think about and understand is that when we say geometry, that could mean station geometry, meaning main lines and vertical alignments, but that geometry could also mean edges of pavements, flow lines of ditches, back of curbs, shoulders, other things as well, okay? So that's kind of where I'm using the term geometry. So we'll lay out the 2D geometry, make modifications to the roadway corridor, then we'll vertically define our 2D geometry by using profiles and vertical geometry tools. Then we're going to actually build the intersection model, which will consist of the pavement section. Of course, for the pavement section, we'll create a terrain and use surface templates. Then we're going to model the shoulders and the side slopes around it. From there, after modeling the intersection, we'll move over into the median crossover area of the roadway corridor, and we'll go through that process too in a little more streamlined fashion. But we're going to go ahead and build that as well. Okay, so that's our basic agenda. So let's get started. All right, there are in your data set, I have opened up the file intersection County Road 421, and you can see that here on the screen, just as we've done in prior sessions. What you see on the screen is the compilation of the data we've built up to this point. The topo's there, the corridor's there, the proposed layout, and so forth are all there. And again, I've just opened that file up directly from MicroStation or for Open Roads Designer, and just to save time to get started. Okay, reference files are all attached. You can see those here on the screen. We could see those in the references as well. We'll look at those in just a second. So we're in the file County Road 421, intersection County Road 421. There's nothing in this file. Everything you see here is represented by reference files. This is where we're going to lay out and model our intersection and our median crossover. So to begin, notice I'm in a 2D file, and we've talked about this in previous sessions, so I won't go into too much depth with it. But I'm in a 2D file. My terrain model is here, although it's not active. So I'm going to select the terrain model graphically, wait for the pop-up menu I'm going to hover over that and wait for the menu to pop up, and I'll set the terrain model active. Now, setting that terrain model active did some things behind the scenes. And before I get started into the actual workflow, I simply want to just activate that terrain, and I want to open up some additional views. So again, using the right-click menu, and you could do this more manually if you wanted to, but off the right-click menu, I can just open up here the three-dimensional view on the right-hand side, and you see the two-dimensional view on the left-hand side. So we want to be able to see both and interact with both so that we can understand what we're doing as we go through the workflow. I'm just going to change the views again, and just because I want to clean up this just a little bit or simplify the view. So I'm going to turn off a couple of things here. Again, this is the area we'll be working, and I'm going to simplify the view. Then I'm going to go to File and Save Settings so that that display set up the way I like it. Okay. Now, one thing I'm going to do as well, if we go back, I'm going to click on View 2, and we'll go look at the references. Let's look at the reference files that are attached. As I mentioned before, these are the files that have been created previously through the course of these sessions, okay? The only difference would be this driveways file, which is included today for this specific session, okay? I'm going to I'll select this file, intersection, County Road 421, the model's default 3D, and I'm going to turn that off. Just to, again, it'll save me some visual, it'll just simplify my view going forward, right? So we'll turn that off. And now we want to get started. So let's begin. Our first step is to lay out the two-dimensional geometry for this particular intersection. And you'll see here where we're located. We're north of the creek crossing where the bridge is going to be, and this is an existing intersection. And again, we're going to modify this as we widen and work on our mainline corridor. So we're going to begin using first of all, the geometry tools. The baseline for the intersecting road is here. You can see it there on the screen. Again, this was pre-created just to save us a little time. And now we're going to work on building the edge of pavement features for our intersection. So I'm going to go to the geometry tab. I'm going to focus in the horizontal tools here in this area. And we're going to use a series of these tools over and over again, but we're going to use them to accomplish certain tasks. So the first thing I want to do is from this baseline, I'm going to lay out, first of all, the edge of pavement along this tangent section. So I'll go here. I'm going to grab under offsets and tapers. I'm going to use this command single offset partial. And then the dialog box will open, but I'm going to follow the prompts on the screen, okay? So select the element. So I'll select the baseline from which I want to create the offsets. And then I'll follow through and offset or input the information. Now, one thing here you'll notice, and I'm going to back up a step just to clarify. So as I begin to lay out these graphics, you'll notice that that line is gray. Now, there's one thing I didn't do, okay? I made a mistake. So I'm going to click the escape key. I'm going to go back here, turn on the feature definition lock, and I'm going to select the feature definition that I want to be applied to all of these edge of pavement features that I'm going to open up, that I'm going to create as I'm going through this workflow, okay? So we'll go back. Again, that was just a simple mistake. It happens all the time. But I want to activate that feature definition so that I get the proper properties, the proper display properties, as I'm laying all this out. So we'll go back. We'll use the same command, single offset partial, select the baseline from which we're going to offset. And now you'll notice the line is blue, so this is using the attribution for our feature definition. We want the offset to be 12, which is keyed in there. I could make that something different if I wanted. We're going to leave it at 12. Push the tab key to lock it, and you'll notice there's a left and right arrow. If I push the left arrow or the right arrow, I'm actually going to pick the beginning point along my main line, or a stationing along that secondary road center line where I want to begin this offset. So I'm just going to pull this down here. And I'm data pointing, and then I'm going to move back. Now, you'll notice that the distance is locked in at station 1 plus 50. And that's I can push the end key, that's END, the end key, if I want to have a rubber banding line. So I can select that graphically, or I can key in a specific value, such as in this case, 150, and push the tab key, and that will lock that value. Okay? So this is the initial edge of pavement along that secondary road center line. I'll data point to accept it. I'm actually going to push the down arrow because I want to mirror this element. I want to create both edges of pavement at the same time. So I'll data point to create both edges of pavement at the same time. Now, those edges of pavement both have a relationship back to this center line from which they were created, and you can see those on the screen. Another thing I need to do at this point as we zoom in here, you'll notice that my initial offset of 12 doesn't meet the existing edge of pavement location. So I'm going to make a quick modification to my proposed edge of pavement. You'll notice they are ruled. It knows it's 12 feet from the baseline, but I'm actually going to just graphically move that. And there's a couple of things I could do to snap it, but I'm just going to move it over, snap it onto the existing edge of pavement feature inside the topo and data point. And I'll do that for the other side as well. And it's just a matter now of grabbing those little cursor prompts along the point there. So I'm not moving it forward any station. I'm just moving it left and right. And again, grab the snap and locate that into the existing edge of pavement. So we've got the beginnings of our edge of pavement laid out. Now we need to think about our transition area, our horizontal arc that will be created between that edge of pavement that we just created and our proposed edge of pavement of our roadway corridor. So I'm going to go into the reference files. I just want to simplify the view a little bit. So I'm going to turn off the proposed layout file. And now you can actually see the line strings for what is in our proposed corridor. So here we see the edge of pavement feature represented in plan view. And I want to create an arc between that edge of pavement feature and then my freshly created secondary road edge of pavement. So I'll go back into the geometry tools, back into the horizontal geometry tools. And here I'm going to go under the arcs menu. I'll select arc between elements, and I'm going to create just a simple arc in this case. There are other options here. You'll notice there are other types of arcs that we could create in this section. So it's the same process depending on what you want for that particular geometric layout. I'm going to place just a straightforward, simple arc. The radius has been, well, we'll use 50 feet. And again, I'm following the prompt. The left, or the first element I'll select will be the left edge of pavement of my proposed corridor. And then the second element would be, let me try that again. So let's select the edge of pavement and select my edge of pavement along my secondary road. And now you can see the visual display of a 50-foot radius. I haven't accepted it, but you can see it there. I could unlock that radius again and modify that, or I can key in the value. I'm going to hold 50 feet as my value. Again, if you want to unlock that, push the end key. So I'll data point to accept that, leave the trim extend option to both, and now we have now created that arc on the western side, well, the northern western side of the intersection. Now we're going to follow the same step for the other side of the intersection. We're going to use the same properties. So again, I'll select the edge of pavement along the mainline corridor and the edge of pavement along the secondary road. We see, again, the result that will be created. I'll data point, I'll trim and extend both the beginning and the ending of the element and accept that. And so now we can take a look. We can see those elements, they've been created inside, or the two-dimensional edge of pavement features have been created. Now we're going to continue working here and recognizing ultimately where I'm going here is I am building the boundary elements. Those edge of pavement features will also be used as boundary elements for a pavement terrain. So in recognizing that, I'm going to again use the geometry tools. I'm going to place just a straight geometric line, and I'm actually going to snap that from the edge of pavement. It doesn't matter if you go left or right, right to left, and snap that again to the opposite side. Again, ultimately here I'm building a terrain, and this line represents my match line with the existing roadway, both horizontally and vertically. Okay, so this will be a boundary element in my terrain that gets created as we work toward this. Okay, now we have the same situation as we get down, as we get to the area where the intersection is going to tie into the proposed corridor. Again, I need to think in terms of terrain modeling, so I need another horizontal element, which will again have vertical definition along that area where my intersection ties to my roadway corridor. So again, I'm going to place another line between points. I'm going to select, or I'm going to snap that to the arc as it intersects along the edge of pavement of the corridor. And I'm snapping these elements, and I can hover over that now and select it. You'll notice that there is a snap rule assigned to it. Okay, so these elements are ruled together. All right, and now let me turn off the corridor graphic, just again to give us a little more simplified view of where we are and what we have done. Okay. Okay, so at this point, let's pull this down here. We've laid out again the intersection, the edge of pavement elements along the intersection, and we've placed what would be considered additional boundary elements, knowing that this is going to be the pavement terrain surface, first of all, okay? So we're going to use these as, again, boundary elements to create the pavement. Now, all of this data is modifiable and editable, okay? So if I don't like 50 feet for the radius, that can be modified now. It can actually be modified later, and we'll look at doing that as we go down, or downstream as we kind of get into this a little farther, okay? All right, so we've got the horizontal definition or the horizontal layout, okay, a very simplified layout of our intersection at this point, okay? Now, we're going to kind of take the next step. How do we interact with this data? How do we make modifications? So at this point, it's laid out. We've got the horizontal elements, but you'll note I need to do some work on the roadway corridor. I still have side slopes and a shoulder inside my model that I need to do something with those. How do I eliminate those? And in the area of the median crossover, which you can see here, I also need to remove that median ditch so that, again, I can recreate the actual median crossover in the model rather than that median ditch, which is being created from the template. So our next step, we're going to do a couple of things, okay? The first is we're going to go and look into the layout file. And let me turn this back on just for a visual. We're going to go look at the layout file first of all. And there's a key point here I want to show you before that leads into modifying the corridor. So let's change files and let's go look at the file in geometry, Highway 72 proposed layout. Now this file contains, again, the geometric layout for the crossovers, the width of the pavement, all those types of things that we defined, again, in earlier sessions. It was kind of the basis from which we've been working. In this file, we have added in some additional graphics, some match line graphics. Now these match line graphics, you'll notice they actually appear at certain areas. And those areas are where driveways or intersections occur along our roadway corridor. Now, why have we placed those into our file? Now, those match lines will be used as a reference into the corridor to remove the end conditions, and I'll show you that in 1 second. But let's take a look at this specific match line for our intersection. So I'm in the file that contains that. I want to reference back, and I want to see my geometric layout for my intersection. So I'm going to reference in my intersection file. And I'm referencing this in really so that I can get a clear picture of how this match line interacts with my actual intersection. And you'll notice that this match line was drawn previously, and it doesn't necessarily match what my intersection is. Now, creating this match line in the real process, you may create the intersection first, then come in and create the match line, and that's fine. The point here is that this match line, I'm just going to key this in or specify this based off of the location of the actual width of the intersection. So I want this to match the width of the intersection, okay? And so again, I'm really just checking this. This is just a check and a quick data point to make sure that it matches. Okay? Now, the key here to take away is, number one, that match line exists, and it exists in this layout file. I'm actually going to detach this. Don't worry about that. I know I tried to rule it. That's fine. I don't want to clog it up with graphics at this point. So my point of removing that. And now we see the match line, and it exists in that file at the width of the intersection. Now I want to actually go modify the corridor based off that match line. So I'm going to browse back and open up into the corridor folder and open up my corridor file, which you see here. And I'm going to, once this is open, we're going to add that match line graphic as an external reference into our corridor. Okay, so here's what we'll do. We'll see the match line. So this file has those same files compiled. We see proposed layout is here. They're all referenced together. So I can access that specific match line graphic. Now, that match line is going to interact with the roadway template. So let me give you a bit of a background how this is going to work. So I'm going to open up the template being used in the roadway corridor. And I'll give you kind of an explanation of how this happens. So we've now opened up the template. Again, this is the template being used along the length of the roadway corridor. And I want you to notice this particular point. And if I move this point, if I modify this point just slightly to the left, notice what happens to the shoulder and the end conditions on that side of the road. If this goes back to the center line or to the right, it reappears, and then it disappears if this point is moved any direction or any slightly to the left. Okay, and now this is the the functionality in this template that we're going to use to remove those end conditions. Okay. Now this happens because this particular point has a feature constraint on it. Notice that it matches the feature definition of the line in our file. Okay, so this is really the key to how this is about to work. Okay, so that point is looking for a feature definition called match line, which is the same feature definition assigned to our driveway entrance line string. And then a display rule actually turns off those elements if it finds it. All right, so that's kind of that explanation behind the scenes, how this is going to work. Now, to activate that, we're going to select the roadway corridor itself. We're going to add that line, that match line string as a corridor reference. So I'll select that button. I'll go out, select the element itself, and then right click. And then the corridor is going to reprocess now that that element's been added as a reference into that file or into that corridor. And you'll see what the results are. So based off of nothing more than that line with a specific feature definition and the template controlling and looking for that feature definition, we've now turned off that area where our intersection is going to be. Okay. Now, again, just to sync things up a little bit, I'm going to quickly reference in our intersection file. Again, just to kind of build consistency with how we are putting the parts together. So we'll reference back the intersection. And now we can graphically see the intersection. The point here I want to make is you'll notice now I need to refine my template drops a little. I need to add in some additional template drops as I get to this point of where my arc begins. I can do that by using key stations. So I'll select the corridor once more and select the key station button. Now I don't want this to occur past where the intersection begins. I want this to occur slightly before. You could mark this off as 100th before the station if you want. It's not super specific, but you want it to be slightly before this point, okay? I want one final template drop before I get to that point, and you'll see how this is going to tie the model together as we go through this. So I'll add in that key station. You'll notice that it adds in an additional template drop, which again, it adds a continuation of my shoulder. I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Zoom in just a little. Again, I know the boundary of my intersection is there. 55, 21, 69, 78. I could key this in, or I could just move over slightly. Again, I'm just moving over a tenth at this point, maybe even a 500th, and I'm data pointing. I just want to get an additional template drop so that I get a continuation of that shoulder and side slope into the area where my intersection shoulder and side slopes are going to begin. Okay? So we've modified the corridor for our intersection. Now we need to modify the corridor while we're here for this area for the median crossover. Now, the way we're going to do this, Scott, when he modeled this corridor, recognizing those key locations along the corridor where modifications were going to have to be made, he made an additional template drop in the area of our crossover, knowing we're going to have to come back and edit that specifically. So using that, I'm going to edit the specific template drop, and you'll see it occurs in the area where the crossover is located. So I'm going to select that graphic, edit the template drop just through that area. And really all I want to do is simply remove the inside shoulder and the median side slopes through that area. So I'll delete those, say OK to that, and then we'll see the model or the corridor reprocess. And we'll see that modification being made. So at this point, basically, we've modified the corridor. We have, again, removed the pieces that we don't need out of the corridor model, and we're going to replace them with the crossover, and we're going to replace them with the intersection model that we're building right now. Okay? So we've taken care of modifications to the corridor. Let's move back into our intersection file and begin to define the verticals within our intersection. So I'm going to move back into our intersection file. Again, this file is where we're actually laying out the intersection, where we're defining the vertical, where we're going to create the model for this intersection. And so now we're back into that file that we began in. You'll notice now we can see the changes that have been made to the corridor. And now we're going to begin now to build up this intersection. Okay? Now, in the methodology that I'm showing you, let me kind of explain here. I'm really showing you the detailed process for being able to absolutely and definitively control the elements within your model. Okay? There are other methods that we could use here, but I'm really giving you a look at the technology and the tools and the workflow and the relational kind of information and the rules and relationships behind the scenes that allow you to model, a lot of stuff, virtually anything at this point, okay? You may have seen civil cells or something being placed at different times. This is showing you all of the technology underneath the hood of a civil cell, okay? So the point here really is to show you, again, exactly how to do this using explicit elements and designing exactly the way you want to. All right, so we've got the 2Ds created. Now it's time to define the vertical for those elements. Now, how do we build the edge of pavement features? How do we define the vertical for our intersection? Now, as I mentioned before, the baseline for this secondary road's been created. We've used the horizontal of that baseline already to create the horizontal edges of pavement. The vertical's been created as well. You see it here in the 3D, okay? Or we'll do this quite a bit. I'll go ahead off that element and I'll open up the profile, because now we're shifting gears into thinking about the profile of these elements, or like I said, sometimes I'll call it the vertical definition of these elements, okay? All right. So let's start looking at that. Let's open up, let's go here and open up the profile for the edge of pavement first of all, okay? So we can see this as it's happening. So right now, as we look along this edge of pavement section, this tangent, we can see the terrain model underneath, but we want to add in verticals for this edge and this edge. To do that, what I'm going to do is, if we go to the geometry tools, the cross slope on this road is a typical 2%, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the vertical tools. I'm going to use, under this drop down, I'm going to use profile by variable slope from element, okay? Now what this does is it takes a baseline element and then it projects a defined cross slope. In this case, we can vary that cross slope, and it allows us to do that from the baseline out to another element and set a profile on it, and that's what we're going to do. I'm varying this because I want to be able to change it from beginning to end. So I'll follow the prompts, locate the element I want to profile, which is this first edge of pavement here on the west side, then locate the reference element. I'll go back here. And then we want to define, where do we want